legend. During the early days of the English Civil War, Warwickshire was flooded with troops of both sides in the build-up to the Battle of Edge Hill. It's said that King Charles I stayed at Locksley Manor House on the night before the battle, and that some of the dead of both sides were buried in the churchyard here. Although 10 miles separate Stratford from Edge Hill, it's said that the townsfolk could clearly hear the sound of cannon fire from the battlefield. In the early stages of the Civil War, Stratford was occupied by Royalists under the command of a Colonel Wagstaff. In February 1643, Lord Brooke, who held Warwick for Parliament, gathered his forces and laid siege to Stratford. The Royalists put up a spirited defence, but were hopelessly outnumbered, and on the 25th of February, Stratford fell to Parliament. But Colonel Wagstaff wasn't quite finished. He'd taken refuge in woods outside the town and slipped back in under cover of darkness. From spies within Stratford, he learned that Lord Brooke and his officers were to hold a council of war in the town hall. The hall was also used as a gunpowder and ammunition store, and Wagstaff hatched a daring plan. He laid a trail of gunpowder from the munitions store to a hiding place a short distance away. When he received a signal that Lord Brooke and his officers were heading for the town hall, he fired the trail of powder and made his escape. Unfortunately, his calculations were a little out, and the munitions store exploded before the commanders got there. Lord Brooke described the scene that lay before him. The town hall was torn in pieces, and a great smoke covered it, which caused a most lamentable and pitiful cry in the town. These were turbulent times indeed, and the list of vicars in Holy Trinity Church gives a clue to the turmoil that afflicted the region. The name John Trapp also appears in St. Peter's Church in Welford, and herein lies a strange tale of a village divided. At the outbreak of the Civil War, the rector of Welford was Dr. Jenkin Bowen, who was fiercely loyal to the king. At this time, the incumbent at nearby Weston was John Trapp, who had previously been headmaster of the Free School in Stratford and a preacher at Luddington. He was a staunch supporter of Parliament, well known for his stern Puritan views and known to his enemies as the preaching rebel. Both men used the pulpit to expound their opposing views and grew increasingly hostile to each other. In May 1644, when the district was under the control of Parliament forces, Trapp had Bowen imprisoned in Warwick and took over Welford parish. His position, though, was precarious to say the least. Most of the parishioners remained loyal to Jenkin Bowen, and sent a message to Royalist-held Worcester that Trapp was preaching against the king. On the 8th of September, a raiding party from Worcester burst into St. Peter's and arrested John Trapp. He was eventually released and spent 2 years as chaplain to parliamentary soldiers in Stratford before being officially appointed as rector of Welford, no doubt to the annoyance of the villagers who thought they were rid of him. Trapp must have led prayers of thanks at Parliament's ultimate victory and the execution of Charles I, but that wasn't the end of the saga. "11 years of puritanical rule under Oliver Cromwell ended with the restoration of Charles II in 1660. Those who had supported the king in the Civil War were back in favour, and Jenkin Bowen was reinstated as rector of Welford. It's recorded that there was much rejoicing, much ringing of bells, and much drinking of ale. Bowen was so pleased to be back, he gave the village its first church clock. In 1869, the Stratford Herald reported what they described as an interesting ceremony. On Saturday, a distinguished party assembled at Bridgefoot. Among them were the mayor, the mace-bearers, the vicar of Holy Trinity, the headmaster of the grammar school, P.C. Harris, and other gentlemen and ladies of Stratford society. The group took to a small fleet of rowing boats and rowed from Lucy's Mill to Tiddington in search of swans, which were corralled in a side creek to be caught, or driven upriver in advance of the boats to be caught later. At Tiddington there was a picnic on the riverbank of bread, cheese and onion, with beer or whisky for the men and sherry for the ladies. This was followed by a leisurely row back downstream to Stratford, during which a mace-bearer and a police officer fell into the river, and there was a little splashing and sprinkling, of which the ladies, by sheer accident of course, obtained rather more than their share. Our reporter also heard that a worthy alderman's beaver hat came to grief through contact with a weeping willow. What the herald was describing was the very first Stratford swan-hopping ceremony, a rather boisterous version of the annual swan-hopping that takes place on the River Thames. The Thames version began in the 15th century when the Act of Swans decreed that all mute swans on open and common water belonged to the reigning monarch. The Crown granted ownership to other organisations who identified their own swans with a special mark. On the Thames, at the annual swan-hopping, the signets are still marked on the beak as either the property of the Crown or of the two privileged City of London companies, the Dyers and the Vintners. But long before they were granted royal status, mute swans were already part of a wildlife elite. Ancient Celtic people believed they were goddesses who took the form of swans, and legend tells us that the swan is utterly silent until the last moment of its life, when it sings one haunting song, its swan song. The Greek philosopher Plato understood completely. As he was led to his execution, he told the crowd, "You think I cannot see as far ahead as a swan. You know that when swans feel the approach of death, they sing. And they sing sweeter and louder on the last days of their lives because they are going back to that God whom they serve." The English, it seems, were a little more pragmatic, and no respectable medieval dinner party was complete without a roast swan to complement the pigeon pies, ducks, and geese. So not only was the ownership of swans a status symbol, they also provided a tasty meal. Ownership of Stratford swans had long ago been granted to Holy Trinity Church, but in 1867 the retiring Reverend G.J. Granville transferred the right to the corporation. The council decided that this extraordinary privilege should be marked with a civic occasion and began the swan-hopping ceremony.